So today's topic is an important one, and it's about the importance of hatchery biosecurity. So when I was working on putting this webinar together and looking at different definitions of biosecurity, this one came up and I really liked it. So for our definition of biosecurity, biosecurity refers to everything people do to keep diseases, viruses, bacteria, funguses, parasites, and other microorganisms that cause disease away from our birds, property, and people. So since we're in the poultry industry, most people should be familiar with avian influenza. So I got this data from the USDA website on confirmed detections of high-path avian influenza. And what we've got is we've got a total of 825 confirmed cases since the beginning of 2022 till present. We've got 47 infected states. And of the 825 confirmed flocks with high-path AI, 323 were commercial flocks, 502 were backyard flocks, and then the staggering amount is the amount of birds affected. 58.65 million birds in the US alone were impacted and confirmed with high-path AI. That's US alone. But this is not just a US problem. As you can see, North America, in Europe, all these red dots are confirmed cases of H5N1 high-path AI. So this is not just a US or North America issue. This is a worldwide issue. So why am I talking about high-path AI when we're talking about hatchery biosecurity? Well, I'll get to that here in a little bit in the next few slides, but let's continue on with some bacteria that are a little bit closer to home, a little bit closer, for example, like in your hatchery. We've got E. coli. E. coli is a natural inhabitant of the gut in poultry species. Normally, it's kept in check by other bacteria. But if large colonies form, it can cause severe discomfort, illness, and mortality. Now, we got to remember all these bacteria are opportunistic. So if we give these bacteria an opportunity to cause havoc, they will. Then we have Streptococcus, another opportunistic infection leading to acute and chronic conditions in infected birds. It causes tissue damage, organ failure, and death. Staphylococcus aureus, another opportunistic bacteria found worldwide. Severe infections will cause early mortality up to 15%. Infections are usually through the respiratory route. So let's look at some other hatchery enemies, such as Pseudomonas. We have high early mortality rates in chicks if our Pseudomonas numbers get too high. And then we have Aspergillus for those folks in the southern parts of the US and other parts around the world. Aspergillus is a fungal infection, in which our typical signs for the young chicks is that they're gasping for breath. They're having a hard time breathing. And then we have Klebsiella. Baby chicks up to 2 weeks of age are most susceptible to this infection. So in my travels, I come across many hatcheries, and I see that there are quite a few hatcheries that have a lack of biosecurity. And my question is, why is that? Is it because they don't think hatchery biosecurity is important? Well, as far as I'm concerned, biosecurity is of utmost importance, and I'll show that to you as we go through this presentation. Yet, these places have biosecurity measures out in breeder, in grow out farm levels. Why is that? Is it because breeder and grow out are more important, and that's why we need biosecurity levels? And again, my answer is no. The hatchery is just as important, and maybe even more so. We have an older facility. We can't put in showers, or we can't afford renovations. So instead of having a really good program, we decide to do nothing. And to me, all of these are not a good thing. There are practices that we can put in place through SOPs, through different methods to keep clean and dirty separate. And we'll go through that in this presentation. So what is the cost of a lack of biosecurity in your hatchery? If we can't afford renovations and we don't do anything, and we can do some things that doesn't cost a whole lot, but doing nothing is probably costing you a lot of money as well. So think about that. So here we go. The meat and potatoes of this presentation, the importance of hatchery biosecurity. So we've got our hatchery in the middle, and then we've got our breeder farm over here. And we have a direct link from hatchery to breeder. And that's via our egg pickup delivery vehicles and staff and the egg truck drivers. We also have our grow out farm over here. And yes, we have a direct link from grow out to hatchery. And that's through our baby chick delivery vehicle and drivers. And we can't forget about our staff, such as our drivers of our egg and chick delivery vehicles. We also have staff, breeder folks that are often housed in the hatchery. And there's hatcheries that also house broiler techs or grow out folks in the hatchery. Is that truly a good idea? So, for example, if we had avian influenza, getting back to one of my first slides, in our breeder flock, and it goes unchecked into the hatchery, and if we have no biosecurity measures in our hatchery, guess what? We can transfer that to our grow farms or other breeder farms, and vice versa. If we have salmonella infections or any other bacterial, fungal, virus infections on the grow side of things, and we bring that back into the hatchery, and we have no biosecurity measures to break that chain, we can easily transfer it again to our breeder folks. So when folks tell me that hatchery biosecurity is not important, it is important. You have a direct link from breeder to grow out and vice versa. So we have two types of biosecurity that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation. We have operational biosecurity, and that's everything from our procedures, SOPs, practices, and policies. And then we have our structural biosecurity. That's our physical barriers. That's to keep clean and dirty separate, such as showers, Danish entries, boot baths, doorway foamers, gates, fencing, etc. To have a good biosecurity program, we need both. We need both operational and structural biosecurity measures. You can't have one and have a good program. We need to have both to have a good program of biosecurity. So let's look at some routes on how hatcheries can be contaminated. We've got air, chick boxes, eggs, people, water, pests, and trucks and supplies. Now we're going to start digging into each one independently. First one is air. Improper airflow within the hatchery definitely causes problems with our room pressures. We've done webinars before where we talked about the importance of room pressures for the proper operation of our incubators and hatchers, and that's true. But room pressures are also important for proper airflow through the hatchery. We need an airflow that goes from a more positive in our clean areas to a more negative in our dirty areas. Leaving doors open is a huge pet peeve of mine, but yet I see that all the time. Doors are left open all the time. They're either propped open with bungee straps, propped open with a cinder block or some bricks, chains, whatever. Those doors are meant, they're there for a reason, and they're meant to be kept closed unless we're going through it. Airflow from clean to dirty, or dirty to clean. It should be from clean to dirty. But if we don't have good control of our airflow, i.e. room pressures, we could have air going from a dirty area, from our hatchers into our incubator hallways, or from our separator room into hatchers. That causes problems. And this is another thing I see time and time again is doors to our rooms open to the outside. Again, this totally disrupts the airflow within your hatchery and within the rooms. Dirty supply and return filters. Again, this is going to create some issues. Not only are we going to continue to recontaminate between, say, for example, in a hatch room, we're going to recontaminate hatchers if we don't keep those clean, or we're going to restrict our airflow and we're not going to have the proper airflow in those rooms. Rooftop units not working properly, loose belts, pulleys that are worn, etc. We need to make sure our rooftop units are working the way they ought to be. Poor hatchery design is another one. So then we're going to look at our eggs, probably one of the dirtiest things that come into our hatcheries. Dirty eggs, floor eggs, dirty nesting material, feathers, cracks, all should be avoided. So I've got a picture here with freshly laid egg. We'll have about 300 or more bacteria on that freshly laid egg. On a clean nest egg, you'll have about 3,000 or more bacteria on a clean egg. We start getting into eggs that are a little bit soiled, and we can have up to 26,000 or more bacteria on a soiled or dirty egg. And then we got this egg down here with severe 3D material on there, and we can have over 400,000, almost a half a million bacteria just on that one egg. So why are clean eggs important in the hatchery? And why are we talking about this for biosecurity? Well, under optimal conditions in a hatchery, a bacteria can divide roughly every 20 minutes. In a 24-hour period with 72 divisions, one bacteria can theoretically become 4.7 septillion cells. That's one bacteria. What about the ones that I showed that had thousands of bacteria or hundreds of thousands of bacteria? A hatchery can be overwhelmed quickly if we don't make sure we have clean eggs coming into our hatchery. This is a bit mind-blowing. So then we got egg handling and transport. We talked about our dirty eggs. We need to avoid setting floor eggs. We need to avoid setting eggs with dirty nesting material, feathers, and cracks. But what about on our farm? What about farm biosecurity? What about the personal hygiene on the farm? What if we have inadequate cooler ventilation in particular temperature? That could create some issues. Our transport, we talked about our egg delivery vehicles. If we have poor transport sanitation, we're not sanitizing it on a daily basis or between pickups, we could be spreading bacteria. Inadequate transport ventilation, temperature. And do your egg pickup trucks go from youngest to oldest? Meaning, do they go from your youngest breeders to oldest? Or do they do something in between? They should go from youngest to oldest. And then our hatchery and farm fumigation and egg sanitation or egg room sanitation practices. Do we have good sanitation and fumigation practices in our egg rooms and on the farm and in the hatchery? And anywhere we have sweating of eggs, that's going to create additional bacterial load on these eggs. So anytime from point of lay until we set these eggs in the incubator, we need to avoid eggs from getting wet or from sweating. So water, why are we talking about water? Well, hatchery water, we use that for cleaning. It's our water supply. We're washing down our incubators, hatchers, our rooms, our separators, transfer machines, etc. If that water supply is contaminated, now you're cleaning with contaminated water. It's also our humidity spray in a lot of hatcheries. A lot of hatcheries don't have an RO system or something along those lines, and we're spraying well water within the incubator or hatcher. So how often do you test your hatchery water for bacterial contamination? You should do that at least once a year, in my opinion. There's different, and if you do find an issue, there's different water purification systems out there with chlorine dioxide. There's others where you can treat water with UV, ozone, and other chemicals out there. But first, we need to find out, do you have an issue? Do you have bacterial contamination in your water supply? If you do, then we need to work on a way to control that. So insects, rodents, animals, wild birds. So insects, we need to stay on top of our insect control. We need to keep our exterior doors closed and locked, like I had mentioned earlier. We need good rodent control practices with our bait stations outside and our live traps inside. And the reason I say that is we don't want bait stations inside the hatchery. We don't want to draw rodents into the hatchery. Keep the bait stations outside. Use your live traps, and there's a variety of different live traps out there, but use your live traps on the inside of the hatchery. Animals and wild birds, we need to make sure we keep our overhead doors closed and entry doors closed. A lot of times in the summer, I'll see overhead doors left open, either in the chick holding dock or the egg dock. Well, that just attracts birds to start roosting and building nests within the hatchery itself. And we need to make sure that we're keeping our overhead doors closed. And we've got our vehicles and equipment. We need to clean and disinfect our egg and chick delivery vehicles daily. Need to do that, or we're going to be spreading bacteria from one farm to the next. We need to utilize wheel dips or spray at the farm and the hatchery to help break that cycle of bringing bacteria back to the hatchery. Only allow necessary vehicles in the hatchery area proper. I mean, we've got a parking lot for our employees, that's fine, but actually coming up next to the hatchery, we should only allow necessary vehicles in that area, in that zone. It'd be ideal to install a gate or fencing around the hatchery, or at least at the entry points coming into the drive of the hatchery. We need to ensure that our egg flats, chick boxes, incubator racks, farm racks, transport dollies are thoroughly cleaned and disinfected. Again, these are coming from the hatchery to either the egg farm or the breeder farm or the grow facility. We need to make sure that the equipment we're bringing out there are definitely thoroughly cleaned and disinfected, so we're not carrying anything from the hatchery to these farms. We need to ensure that our drivers use proper PPEs, that's proper protective equipment, at the breeder and grow farms. They need to use disinfectant spray on their boots and the interior of the cab at each delivery. I know this is kind of a pain. This may be out of the norm for folks, but it is essential to break the cycle of bacterial contamination. And then the next most prevalent or dirtiest thing that comes into the hatchery is people. We need to make sure people are moving from clean to dirty areas and not going from dirty to clean. We definitely need to work on training and have an SOP for our biosecurity program. We need, especially if we don't have a biosecurity program in the hatchery, you're going to need to spend quite a bit of time training, going through the importance of why this is important. Why does this really matter? Clothing. Hatchery employees should have dedicated hatchery clothing and hairnets. They shouldn't really come to work in their street clothes and go right to work. Ideally, it'd be nice to have a shower-in facility, but if we can't, we got other things we can do, like a Danish entry. And we'll talk about that in a moment. We've got foot baths, doorway foamers that can be used. Visitors should be kept to a minimum. And then our staff access to vectors of contamination. So do they have pet birds? Do they have a backyard flock? Do they hunt for ducks? What kind of farm animals do they have? What does their family or spouse do? And then what kind of hobbies do the employees and staff have? Do they play golf? One of the big things on most golf courses that I've seen is a bunch of geese on a golf course. So if you're going to play 9 holes at lunchtime and then come back into the hatchery with the same clothes and shoes, that could be a problem. So we need to think about that. We need to work with our employees. We need to train our employees on these types of things. And we need to restrict our staff movement within that hatchery. As I mentioned earlier, we need to keep those working with eggs and those working with chicks separate. So if we can, ideally, if we could have, separate break areas, that would be great. If not, maybe stagger it such that, the folks in the egg room take break a little bit before the folks in the chick and separator rooms. Just trying to, again, reduce that contamination or possible contamination. What about preventing folks from dirty areas or areas that come into contact with chicks accessing clean areas? A lot of hatcheries I go into, you got staff walking all over. And then what do you do about your maintenance personnel who have to walk all over the place? So we got to think about that. When you're a hatchery manager, we need to think about that. How are people going to flow through that hatchery? How are we going to get our work done? I used to use color-coded uniforms, or actually scrubs, to help restrict personnel, and it was easy for me. I had red colored for my people in the dirty areas, green, which is in the hatchery areas where clean meets dirty, and then I had my blue folks, blue scrubs, in the clean areas. So I could walk through the hatchery and quickly spot, people in the wrong area. If I see, somebody with red scrubs in the egg room, that's a problem. So again, as you're thinking about biosecurity, you're thinking about putting a program together, these are some things that might help. And again, traffic inside the hatchery should flow clean to dirty. Visitors, contractors, they should sign in when they come to the hatchery. There should be a little bit of a questionnaire to evaluate your biosecurity risk. And it should include something like, what farms they've been on, if they've had bird contact, and when was the last bird contact? Do they have any pets or pet birds, those types of things? Do they have a backyard flock? Those are some things you need to think about asking visitors and contractors. We need to provide visitors and contractors some PPE and hairnets, as well as requiring them to wash their hands. Vehicles should definitely go through a wheel dip or spraying of the wheels if their vehicle is going to come close to the hatchery and not just out in the parking lot. And then this one is something that is often overlooked is, you've got an electrical contractor or a plumber or somebody comes out. What about their tools? Where have they been? Have they been on a farm? Have they been in another hatchery? We need to make sure that these tools are clean, disinfected prior to entering the facility, or don't have them bring them in at all. I know a lot of folks will spray them off with, like a Tectrol spray or something along those lines, but we need to think about that as well. I'm just trying to give you guys ideas about what we need to think about if we're going to implement a good biosecurity program within the hatchery. So some practical applications. Ideally, it'd be nice to have a shower-in facility, but some of these older hatcheries, that doesn't necessarily work very easily. Certainly new hatcheries, in my opinion, should have, shower in facilities already thought about and built in. But if we can't do a shower in facility, we can't add bricks and mortar, we can do a Danish entry. And if this is new to you folks, we have the exterior of the hatchery here. We add a little area where we come in through a foot bath or doorway foamer. We remove our street clothes, street footwear. We go over a little bench. This is a demarcation line or a line of separation where we have dirty and clean. We then put on our clean hatchery clothing and hatchery dedicated footwear, and then we can enter the farm or the hatchery. And here's some examples of some Danish entries. They don't have to be very elaborate. I certainly wouldn't use this one. That's just all wood, because that is another issue of trying to keep it clean. But, we don't have to spend a whole lot of money here, and it would be better than not doing anything. So having an area where we can separate, we have a line of separation from dirty to clean is important. It's the biggest way we can break that line of contamination. And then boot baths must be changed frequently. Rarely do I see a boot bath that looks that clean. Most of them look nasty. I'm not necessarily a fan of boot baths because rarely are they properly maintained. And guess what? They're easily skirted around. So I go to a lot of hatcheries and I watch folks, and a lot of people walk right past the boot bath, skirt around it, never even step in it, or they may step one foot in it and the other foot out. At that point, what good is your boot bath other than, yeah, you have a boot bath and you're checking off a box? But we need to make sure that, our structural biosecurity practices, including boot baths, if you're going to use a boot bath, they're being used and they're being used properly. What I prefer over a boot bath is a doorway foamer. We've got an apparatus on the sidewall over here, and every 10-15 minutes, it's spraying out a foam of fresh, new disinfectant. You can adjust the spray pattern, so it's really hard to skirt around it. You have to walk through it. And so I do like that. And it works 24/7. So it works on second shift, works on third shift, works on the weekends, works on holidays. We don't have to worry about someone remembering to change out the water or the chlorine powder in our boot baths. This works all the time. So I prefer doorway foamers. They're not that expensive, and you can put them as you enter the hatchery. You can put them in each of your rooms. So coming and going in your separator room, your chick processing room, in particular, your dirty box room, your egg room. Those are the areas I would prefer to have a doorway foamer. There are different fogging systems out there. There's different barrel foggers. There's portable foggers, and most of you know what those are and have those. There's central fogging systems out there that work when folks aren't around, and those work well as well. Then some hatcheries have fumigation chambers. So we've got disposable coveralls, footwear, and hair coverings that we need to make sure that our visitors are wearing. And then for our hatchery employees themselves, ideally dedicated hatchery clothing and footwear and hair coverings would be ideal for the hatchery folks. So we can't talk about biosecurity without spending at least a few minutes talking about cleaning and disinfecting. So too often we focus our attention on disinfects and sanitizers and not enough attention on the physical act of cleaning. Cleaning is essential to disinfecting. The success of any disinfectant's efficacy is based on thorough cleaning. 85 to 90% of the microorganisms are removed in the cleaning process. Need to remember that. Most of the bacteria are being removed in the physical act of getting the equipment, rooms cleaned. And the goal of this whole process is microbial control and reduction. First few slides I talked about is when we talked about the different bacterial diseases in our hatcheries. They're opportunistic. So if their numbers get too high or get out of control, that's when we start having problems. So our goal is microbial control. We need to reduce those bacterial numbers. We can do that by a good job of cleaning and then finish the rest of them off with using a good disinfectant. And no disinfectant in the world, including formaldehyde, will minimize the error of improper cleaning. So why are we using disinfectants? We saw this slide earlier in the presentation. Under optimal conditions, a bacteria can divide every 20 minutes. In 24 hours, you're going to have 4.7 septillion cells. So again, we need to make sure we're doing a good job of cleaning and then using a good disinfectant at the right concentration to kill the rest of the cells. Because again, we don't want 4.7 septillion cells in our incubators and hatchers and hatchery. So some uses of disinfectants. Obviously, it helps break the cycle of contamination. We can use it to sanitize our water, which we talked about earlier. A good disinfectant has a residual germicidal effect. So it'll keep on killing even after it's been dried, even after we've set eggs into it, we will have some sort of residual kill action on that bacteria, fungus, or virus. So it's important that we look for that in whatever disinfectant we decide to use. As a protective shield against bacteria. And I know we've talked about this a number of times, having a good scheduled maintenance program. Well, again, we need to have a good scheduled maintenance and sanitation program for a good, consistent hatchery operation. It is essential that we need both. Like I talked about earlier, we need proper training and inspection of our maintenance and sanitation programs. And what may appear visually clean sometimes isn't, and can open the door to such diseases as Aspergillus and some of the Salmonella, some of the other diseases out there. So if it's visually clean, that's good, but we need to make sure it's more than just visually clean, that we've used a good disinfectant on it. So we talked about, an operational biosecurity program. We talked about SOPs, and procedures. Well, when we define the procedure, we need to talk about the sanitation, the physical act of removing the 3D material in the rooms, in our incubators, in our hatchers, in our transfer equipment, in our separators, and the like. We need to make sure the equipment, the walls, the surfaces, the drains in particular. A lot of people forget about the drains within the hatchery and the gutters. Need to make sure those are clean. That all needs to be part of that procedure. We need to talk about the application of our disinfectant, and the rate, how it's mixed, so that we get a good kill of the bacteria and the organisms, and that we can establish some residual bacteriostasis. And then we need to decide which disinfectant or which disinfectants we want to use within the hatchery. Every hatchery is a little bit different. There's all kinds of different disinfectants out there. First, we need to make sure it is approved for a hatchery, because some disinfectants may be harmful and can be harmful to the developing embryo. So make sure that we're using a disinfectant that is labeled for use in a hatchery. But then we've got, E. coli, Proteus, Pseudomonas, staph, strep, salmonella, molds. We just need to find a disinfectant that's going to work with us and work for us. And remember to follow the labeled directions on any chemicals that you use, whether they're cleaning or whether they're disinfectants. More is not always better. More disinfectant or a higher concentration can be just as bad as not having enough. So follow the recommended directions for the chemicals that you use. What I do like is pH rotations. A lot of people talk about, we need to rotate our disinfects because bacteria are going to become resistant to that disinfectant. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. What I prefer is a pH rotation of our cleaning products, going from an alkaline cleaner or from a chlorinated foamer or cleaner to one that is more acidic, because alkaline foamers and cleaners tend to leave detergent residues on our surfaces. We have precipitated minerals, we have biofilms that form, and that will create issues. Biofilms are a film with precipitated minerals, so calcium, and we've got bacteria hidden within those, and it's very difficult to get rid of that bacteria. So what I recommend is rotate to an acid tray wash, an acid foamer or cleaner 1 week out of every 4 weeks. This helps remove residues, our line scale, mineral deposits, and our biofilms. What I used to do is the first week of every month was our acid week. And it was easy to remember, it's easy to do, and I would highly recommend that. That would certainly keep your washers and your incubation equipment in much better shape. And we're going to go from an alkaline cleaner, so a chlorinated cleaner with about a pH of 13.5, to an acid cleaner, which has a pH of about 1. And what it's doing, it's shocking the environment. So when we talk about our automated tray, rack, buggy washers, box washers, again, this is another area where pH rotation is necessary. It's shocking the environment. But this is the important part here, folks. Tray washer temperatures are super important. We need to have at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit or more, or 60 degrees Celsius or more. Why? Because it helps kill Pseudomonas. Remember that little bacteria we talked about earlier in this presentation? This is why it's important. We need to kill this guy. Because otherwise, if our washer is less than that 140 and somewhere in that 100 to 120 range, guess what? We're growing Pseudomonas. So if our washers are running less than 140 and we're less than 120, we're growing Pseudomonas. So all your egg flats, all your chick boxes, you're just covering them in Pseudomonas. They may look clean, but bacterial wise, they're not. They're just covered in Pseudomonas. So we may start out in a hatchery, and I see this all the time. I see hatcheries when we start out in the beginning of the day, we've got 145-degree water. But by break time, by lunchtime, we're down in this range. That's not good. So need to know your washer temperatures. So for the hatchery managers out there, cleaning and disinfecting, we need to define the procedures. We need to set the standards. We need to measure our results, and you can measure the results through air plates and swabs, send them to a lab and get the results. And we need to continually look to improve our processes. Setting the standards, the little things do really count. As a hatchery manager, we must set the standard as to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. We need to be very detail-minded. We must check behind our sanitation crew. I always used to say, we need to inspect what we expect. We need to appoint sanitation leads or supervisors and hold them accountable and never assume anything. We need to develop SOPs, activity charts to have our leads and supervisors sign off on. So what is our objective for a good biosecurity and hatchery hygiene program? Our objective is to continually break the cycles of contamination. You heard me say that throughout the presentation. We need to break the cycle. We need to break the cycle, one, coming into that hatchery. The first thing we can do is have a separation of clean and dirty. We can do that through showers. We can do that through a Danish entry. We can do that through a variety of different ways. We need to maintain the lowest level of microbial and fungal contamination at all times, either coming in or leaving the hatchery. So in conclusion, proper biosecurity and sanitation are the most effective ways to guard against infectious diseases from entering the hatchery or spreading from the hatchery. Biosecurity must and has to be a team effort. A few people doing it is not going to help. Everybody needs to do it. Everybody needs to do it every day, not just Monday through Friday, 6 to 5. We need to do it on all shifts, all days, holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever. We need to practice good biosecurity. Everyone must work together to follow our biosecurity programs every day, as I mentioned, to protect our birds. And by practicing good biosecurity, you will reduce the risk of people, animals, eggs, equipment, and vehicles from carrying diseases to and from your hatchery. So do we have any questions?
Perfect, Henry. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was pretty good. Now we will open the question section of the webinars. Do you think all the parameters or complete the parameters of the biosecurity is the start to the program of the zero antibiotics on the hatcheries?
Oh, absolutely. We need to have a good biosecurity and hatchery sanitation program for us to go antibiotic free within our hatcheries. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. Absolutely.
Okay. Also, and in many hatcheries, the people use these caps, these bowfan caps for the hair protection. Can you explain what is the reason of using these implements?
Yeah, so the hairnets, the bouffant caps are important because there's the dirtiest part of people are our hands, our feet, and then exposed hair, exposed skin. So by putting a hairnet over your hair, you're going to help protect the hatchery environment from being contaminated and from getting contaminated. So like when you're out on a breeder farm or out on a grow farm, we put on boot covers, we put on, you know, a Tyvek suit, and we always put a hairnet on. And that's why we're doing that. And we should do the same thing in the hatchery as well, especially for, you know, hatchery employees that may move around within the hatchery, like maintenance personnel. You can be in the separator room where there's a lot of chick fluff, and then you have to go and work on a hatcher or work on an incubator. You know, you can take that hairnet off, put a new hairnet on. You can, you know, put a new scrub top on, something along those lines to help try to keep yourself as clean as possible.
And do you think the use of these bouffant caps replace the action of take a shower to enter the hatcheries?
Well, ideally, a shower is the best. But again, you know, a lot of hatcheries, because of, you know, how old it is, we don't have the ability, we can't easily put in a shower. So those bouffant caps are a second best step. You can have your Danish entry. There's things we can do without having to do a shower. Shower is ideal, but you know, there's other things we can do.
Okay. Perfect.
That would help, and that will help.
What tools we can use inside the hatchery to evaluate the proper action of the disinfectants or the implement that we use inside the machines or inside the rooms, or the only way to inspect if the cleaning was proper is only looking at it?
So there's a couple things we can do. First thing is obviously look at it. We want to make sure that if we're cleaning a hatcher or cleaning our separator, it's visually clean. We need to make sure it's visually clean. The second thing we can do is, after we've cleaned it, disinfected it, the disinfectant has dried, we can take swabs and we can actually plate the swabs on an auger plate, grow it for 24 hours and see what kind of bacterial growth you have, to see if the sanitation crew is doing a good job. That takes at least a day. There are systems out there. They're called ATP systems that will give you swab it, you put it in the reader, and you'll get the results in a matter of minutes instead of, you know, a day or longer. So a lot of the processing plants use these ATP testing equipment, and what the ATP systems do is it's looking for, you know, the bacteria cells. So you just want to make sure there's a couple different ones out there. One looks for the cells and one looks for, I believe, live bacteria. If you look for the live bacteria, that's the one that I would get, because this way you know if you have active bacteria still alive. Okay. So there's things out there. If you have a processing plant, you can talk with the processing plant manager. You can Google it. You can email me, whatever. We can help you find something.
For sure. Another question here is how to know if the setter is contaminated and what we can do to resolve it.
So again, in our setters, it depends if it's, you know, single stage or multi-stage. If it's single stage, we can monitor, just like we talked about previous question, look for it to be visually clean, swab it, use the ATP swabs. We can find out if it's clean or not. You can do the same in hatchers. In a multi-stage machine, obviously doesn't get cleaned out every time. You can still take your ATP swabs. You can take a regular swab and plate it and see what kind of bacteria grow and see where you're at.
Okay.
I used to swab my hatchery every month. I took random incubators, hatchers. I swabbed drains, my my ventilation equipment, my washers, the inside of my washers, my hatch baskets, chick boxes, egg flats. I would swab everything after it's been cleaned and dried just to see how we were doing.
Perfect. Do you have any recommendation for cleaning the air intake in the hatchery room?
Well, you'll have to get, to clean the ventilation in rooftop units, you'll have to make sure whatever you do is recommended by the manufacturer of that rooftop unit. So I would say just get with them and see what's recommended. I don't want to recommend, chemicals or disinfects and it does damage to your equipment. So I would get with the manufacturer of the equipment.
The people are asking, actually, I see a lot of questions about the Aspergillus fungus. The people are questioning about how these Aspergillus can enter to our hatcheries and how we can fight it.
Well, Aspergillus is usually associated with wood products. It could be associated with cardboard. It could be associated if you have a hatchery close to, say, a feed mill, or you've got a hatchery close to, a grow barn, breeder barn, or it could be coming in from your eggs, your egg truck drivers. There's a lot of different ways, like I talked about, where we could have that contamination coming into the hatchery. Once Aspergillus is in the hatchery, that's another problem, because that is a very, very hard fungus to get rid of. So the first thing we need to do is do a good, thorough job throughout the hatchery, including your ventilation systems. We have to get them clean. We have to then use a disinfectant that kills funguses. Okay. We don't want to be too worried about the bacteria now. We are worried about our fungus. So again, when we look at the labels of different disinfects, we need to find something that is good with fungal infections. And then we need to use that to try to break that cycle. There's different products out there. I know there's Clinifarm, that's getting hard to get, where you could spray that. You used to be able to fog that in a hatchery. I used to do that quite a bit. So there's products out there, but we need to find something that is going to be, that'll work against funguses in particular.
Sir. Also, the people
they can ask me questions if they have any additional questions. Yep.
Yep, I gotcha. Also, the people are asking, I see a lot of questions about the dirty eggs inside the hatchery. So do you recommend extra cleaning inside the hatcheries? And what is the better way to do it?
Ideally, we don't set them, but I know that's easier said. It's easier said than done. So obviously, if you're going to have really dirty eggs, we're going to have to stay on top of our cleaning. Yes. Make sure we put the eggs in the bottom of our incubator racks. This way, if you have some exploders, it minimizes the impact. If you have a multi-stage hatchery and you're setting dirty eggs, you're going to probably need to clean your incubators more than once a year if you're cleaning them once a year, but we would probably need to go through a incubator cleaning rotation more frequently. So again, yes, if you know you're getting dirty eggs, you're going to have to just step up your cleaning in the egg rooms all the way through.
So do you suggest doing all this cleaning in the farm instead?
Well, ideally, getting good clean nest eggs is ideal. Washing eggs, I mean, it can be done, but it needs to be done properly. If you don't do it properly, washing eggs can be worse. So there are things that can be done. And again, I can talk to those individual folks one-on-one or via email or whatever, if they want some specific guidelines to that. There's some things that can be done, but ideally it's best not to even have it come into the hatchery.
Perfect. Okay. Another question is, also the people are asking a lot about the showering. I think not too much people like that because the people, are okay with the showering when we enter to the hatcheries, but I also see a lot of questions when if you have to shower at the out of the hatchery. I mean, in the end of the day.
Oh, at the end of the day?
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't want to shower going out, at least shower going in, and we're not bringing anything coming into the hatchery. The reason you shower out is so that we're not going to take anything out of the hatchery, any bacteria out of the hatchery, bring it into our houses. But if you can only do one, at least shower into the hatchery. And if we have our dedicated hatchery clothing, our hair nets, our dedicated hatchery footwear, then that's, again, it's a compromise. It's better than not doing a shower.
Okay. See another questions. See a bunch. Do you recommend the use of antibiotics in the hatcheries in case they start to see problems about contamination into the machines or at the rooms?
Oh, that's a tough one. Again, if our hatchery is properly, if we have good biosecurity, good hatchery hygiene, we don't need antibiotics in the hatchery. It's been proven. We have many hatcheries not using antibiotics, and we're not having any issues. So it all comes down to good biosecurity practices with eggs, with people coming into the hatchery, and a good sanitation hygiene program within the hatchery, and we don't need antibiotics. If you need antibiotics, to me, we have an issue with our biosecurity and sanitation program.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Well, I see a lot of questions here, but actually we will respond a bunch of them during the presentation and this couple of questions more.
Okay. And
yeah.
we will respond to individual questions as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So at the end, a lot of people are asking about if we can share the presentation, and yes, we're gonna share the presentation. Also, we're gonna share this video on our all social medias like YouTube. You can find that in case you wanted to show it to the rest of your team, because as Henry said, the biosecurity is a team effort. So everyone have to be included in these programs. So, well, I think that's it. I'm gonna finish the presentation here. Thank you so much, Henry, for your presentation, for answering all the questions.